Before this story begins, people in many villages share an old belief. After midnight, the smell of fresh fish doesn't attract only humans. It attracts something else, especially if someone carries fresh fish across a lonely marsh using the shortcut home. They say something may decide to follow them. The story you're about to hear was told to me by an old fisherman. Before he began, he looked at me and quietly said, "If you're ever late returning home with fresh fish, never take the shortcut across the marsh." This happened during the monsoon season of 2022. My name is Rafiq. The local market was about 8 kilometers from our village. Twice a week, a large fish market was held there. That afternoon, I went to buy a big katla fish for my family. The market was crowded. Choosing the fish, bargaining with the sellers, and buying a few other things took much longer than I expected. Before I realized it, night had fallen. By the time I left the market, it was around 12:20 a.m. There were 2 roads leading home. One was the main paved road, but it would take more than an hour. The other was a narrow dirt path, cutting straight across the middle of the marsh. If I took that shortcut, I'd be home in about 20 minutes. But that path had a dark reputation. No one in the village walked there after midnight. People used to say that something wandered through the marsh at night, following the scent of fresh fish. I never believed stories like that. Inside my shopping bag was a freshly caught katla fish, weighing nearly 4 kilograms. I hung the bag from my bicycle's handlebar and chose the shortcut. The night was incredibly dark. There wasn't a single light anywhere. On both sides of the narrow path stretched endless marshland. A thin layer of mist floated silently above the water. The sound of crickets, mixed with the distant croaking of frogs, made the silence feel even heavier. About 10 minutes into the ride, a strong smell of raw fish suddenly filled the air. I frowned. The fish was already in my bag, so why did the smell become so overwhelming? A few seconds later, it felt as though the smell was coming from somewhere ahead of me. I slowed my bicycle. Just then, something moved in the dark water beside the path. Splash! I quickly pointed my flashlight toward the marsh. Nothing. Maybe it was just a large fish. That's what I told myself, and continued riding. Then I heard it again. Splash. A few seconds later, closer this time. Splash. Splash. It sounded as though someone was walking through the shallow water, keeping the exact same pace as my bicycle. I stopped. The sound stopped too. I started riding again. The sound returned. A cold fear settled deep inside my chest. Gathering my courage, I shined the flashlight across the water once more. At first, I saw nothing. Then, slowly, 2 pale white eyes appeared above the surface of the black water. They weren't looking at me. They were staring directly at the bag of fish hanging from my bicycle. A wave of fear rushed through my body. I pressed harder on the pedals. Then, right beside my ear, a voice whispered so softly I could barely hear it. "Leave the fish." I immediately looked behind me. No one was there. But at that exact moment, more pale white eyes began appearing one after another across the dark surface of the marsh. I pressed harder on the pedals. But suddenly, my bicycle felt much heavier than before. It was as if someone was holding it from behind. I struggled to keep moving forward. Then, the marsh erupted with sound. Splash, splash, splash. This wasn't the sound of fish anymore. It sounded like dozens of people running through knee-deep water on both sides of the narrow path. I gathered the courage to look to my right. The moment I did, my blood ran cold. Several figures were standing in the black water. Their bodies looked almost human, but their faces were unnaturally long. Their eyes were pale white, glowing in the darkness. Every one of them had turned toward the bag of fish hanging from my bicycle. One of the figures slowly stretched out its arm. The arm kept getting longer, long enough to almost reach me. Then, the fish inside my bag suddenly jerked violently. I nearly lost control of my bicycle. The fish was dead. So, how could it possibly move? A whisper drifted past my ear once again. This time, it was much clearer. "We're hungry. Leave the fish, or..." Before the sentence could finish, something yanked the back of my bicycle with incredible force. I was thrown onto the dirt path. My flashlight rolled away, its beam shining across the marsh. And in that light, I saw something that still haunts me to this day. At least a dozen figures were standing on the surface of the water, but none of them had legs. Everything below their waists disappeared into the black marsh. They were all staring at me. Then, slowly, their faces twisted into impossibly wide smiles. Suddenly, they all opened their mouths at the same time, but no human voices came out. Instead, the night filled with a horrifying sound, like hundreds of fish flapping wildly all at once. The noise echoed across the marsh. My entire body trembled. Then I remembered something my grandfather once told me. If anything in the marsh asks for your fish after midnight, leave the fish behind and never look back. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the bag from my bicycle and threw it onto the middle of the path. The moment it hit the ground, everything became silent. Then, all of the figures rushed toward the bag at once. The sound that followed was like something that had been starving for years, finally finding food. I didn't wait another second. I picked up my bicycle and rode home as fast as I could. By the time I reached home, the first call to prayer was echoing from the village mosque. My whole body was still shaking. The next morning, I returned to the marsh with several villagers. My torn shopping bag was still lying in the middle of the path, but the fish was gone. There wasn't a single trace of it. Instead, the muddy ground was covered with countless wet handprints. It looked as though dozens of hands had crawled over the bag. The oldest fisherman in the village looked at the scene and quietly said, "They don't come for the fish, they come for its scent." And anyone who crosses the marsh alone, carrying fresh fish at midnight, may make it home the first time. But if they return a second time, they may never make it home at all. After that night, I never took the shortcut across the marsh again. Even today, during dark monsoon nights, some villagers claim they can still see pale-eyed figures standing silently above the black water. They aren't watching people. They're searching for whoever is carrying the scent of fresh fish.